The old clock on the wall of Mrs. Lily's tiny sewing shop ticked slowly. It was almost time to close, and Mrs. Lily was ready for a nice, warm cup of tea. Her fingers, which had sewn so many clothes over the years, were a little tired. She was a quiet lady, with soft gray hair pulled back in a neat bun, and kind eyes that had seen a lot of changes in her city. Just as she was about to turn the sign to close, the door burst open. A man strode in, looking very important and a little grumpy. He wore a fancy, dark gray suit that looked like it cost a lot of money, probably more than Mrs. Lily made in 3 whole months. His shoes were shiny, and his watch sparkled. He seemed like he was always in a hurry. He didn't even say hello. He was talking into his phone, sounding a bit upset. "I don't care what Mr. Smith said. The meeting is at 7 in the morning, and I need this fixed tonight." He lowered his phone a tiny bit and looked at Mrs. Lily, almost like he didn't really see her, but saw a chair or a table instead. "You fix clothes?" he asked, not really waiting for an answer. "Yes, I do," Mrs. Lily said, her voice soft but clear. "But I'm just about to close up for the day. This won't take long." "Easy fix," he said, shrugging off his fancy jacket. He held it out to her, and she could see that the shoulders looked a bit off, like they were pulling in a strange way. "Needs to be just right for my meeting tomorrow." Mrs. Lily took the jacket. It felt heavy and smooth. She could tell right away that this wasn't just any jacket from a regular store. This was a special kind of suit, made by a very fancy tailor who charged lots of money for each piece. "I'll need to look at it closely," she said. "Could you come back tomorrow afternoon?" The man's face got a little tight, not exactly angry, but close. "I need it tonight. I have a very important meeting at 7 a.m. I can't walk in there looking like my tailor doesn't know what he's doing." "Then maybe you should go to your tailor," Mrs. Lily suggested gently. He looked down at his phone again, scrolling through it, not really paying attention to her words. "I would if I had the time. Look, I'll pay extra. Whatever you want, just fix it now." Mrs. Lily really wanted to say no. Something about this man made her feel a bit uneasy, like a tiny prickle on her skin. It wasn't exactly fear, but more like a feeling that letting him into her shop would bring some kind of trouble she didn't want. But then she remembered the letters hidden in her cash register drawer, letters from her landlord saying she had to pay more rent, or she might lose her beloved shop. Those letters whispered louder than her uneasy feeling. "I'll see what I can do," she finally said. "It might take a few hours." "Fine. I'll wait," he said, and then he went back to talking on his phone. He didn't wait like a normal customer. He walked back and forth, like a tiger in a cage. He took 3 more phone calls, each one louder than the last. He talked about big meetings and money and plans that Mrs. Lily didn't understand. He even grumbled about the chairs in her waiting area, saying they weren't comfortable, and at one point, he actually asked if her tiny shop had Wi-Fi, as if it were a fancy office building. Mrs. Lily just ignored him. She had a job to do. She carefully spread the fancy jacket on her special work table, under a bright lamp. She looked at it very, very closely, like a detective looking for clues. She had been sewing clothes for 50 years, so her eyes knew exactly what to look for. The outside of the jacket looked perfect. The lines were neat, the stitches were tiny and even, and everything looked balanced. But when she felt the shoulders, she understood what the man meant. There was a little pull, a tiny feeling that something wasn't quite right, even though you couldn't really see it. She turned the jacket inside out to look at the lining, which is the soft fabric on the inside. That's when she saw it. The way the stitches were sewn on the inside shoulder seam was very unusual. It wasn't wrong in a way that made the jacket fall apart, but it was too special, too tricky. The thread was the exact same color as the fabric, so it was almost invisible, but the pattern of the stitches was very complicated, like a secret message. It wasn't just there to hold the jacket together. Mrs. Lily had seen stitches like this before. A long, long time ago. In a different life. Her hands started to shake, and it wasn't because of her old joints this time. It was a different kind of shaking. She leaned in closer, pulling out her special magnifying glass to look at the seam up close. The stitch pattern was like a secret code. It had numbers hidden in the length of each stitch and in the way the thread turned. And tucked right into the stitching itself, there was a tiny, super thin tag, like a piece of paper, with words printed on it so small she could barely read them. She gasped. Her breath caught in her throat. "How much longer?" the man called from across the room, sounding impatient. Mrs. Lily's mind raced. She knew what this was. She knew where it came from. And she knew that touching it could bring back all the bad memories she had tried to bury for 30 years. "Who made this jacket?" she asked, trying to keep her voice calm and steady. The man looked up from his phone, a bit annoyed. "What?" "The tailor." "Who made this for you?" "Why does that matter?" "Because I need to make sure my fix looks just like their work." Mrs. Lily lied, quickly making up an excuse. "If I'm fixing their mistake, I should understand how they do things." He waved his hand dismissively. "Some place uptown. Carlyle and Company. Supposedly one of the best custom shops in the country, though clearly they missed something. Carlyle." The name hit Mrs. Lily in her chest like a heavy stone. She knew that name. Different people probably owned it now, but it was the same shop, the same secret ways of doing things. They were still doing it, after all these years. They were still hiding codes and secrets in clothes. She looked at the man again, really looked at him this time. She tried to figure out who he was and why his jacket had these secret marks that were supposed to have disappeared a long time ago. He didn't look like someone who needed secret codes. He looked like a regular rich, powerful man. But the stitches told a different story. Mrs. Lily made a choice. She didn't know if it was the right choice, but 30 years of hiding felt like enough. She carefully, oh so carefully, took out the coded part of the stitching, picking apart the tiny threads with hands that remembered exactly how to do it. The tiny tag came free in her fingers. She put it aside, out of sight, and then she started to rebuild the shoulder of the jacket, making it strong and normal, with no secret codes. It took her 3 long hours. The man complained twice more, took 7 more phone calls, and finally fell asleep in one of her uncomfortable chairs around 9 p.m. Mrs. Lily worked in silence, her hands steady, even though her heart was pounding inside her chest. She didn't just fix the shoulder. She completely changed how the inside of the jacket was put together, taking out every single trace of the secret code system. She replaced it with neat, simple, honest sewing. When she finished, the jacket hung perfectly. It looked exactly the same as when he brought it in, but now it had no hidden secrets. She gently woke the man up. He jumped, confused, checked his watch, and said a bad word under his breath. "It's done," she said, holding up the jacket. He snatched it from her hands, put it on, and looked at himself in the small mirror on her wall. He turned left, then right, moving his shoulders to feel the fit. "Good," he said, as if he expected nothing less. "What do I owe you?" "Nothing," Evelyn said. He paused, and for the very first time since he walked in, he actually looked at her. Really looked. "What?" "Consider it a courtesy," Evelyn repeated. His eyes got narrow, like he was suspicious. "Why?" Mrs. Lily met his gaze steadily. "Because whoever stitched that jacket didn't just make clothes. They were hiding something. And now it's gone." The man's face changed. First confusion, then he seemed to understand, and then something like worry or alarm flickered in his eyes. He opened his mouth to speak, closed it, then pulled out his wallet. He threw $200 bills on the counter. "Keep it," he said sharply. "I don't want your money." "Then donate it." "I don't care." He was already walking towards the door, his expensive jacket swinging behind him. He paused with one hand on the doorknob, looking back at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You sure about this?" "I'm sure." He left without another word. The bell above the door chimed softly, sounding final as the door closed behind him. Mrs. Lily stood alone in her shop, surrounded by her sewing machines and colorful threads, feeling like she had just stepped off a very tall cliff. She walked to her work table and picked up the tiny tags she had removed from his jacket. Under the bright light, she could see the tiny words, numbers, and secret symbols she remembered from decades ago. She should destroy it, burn it, throw it far, far away. Instead, she slipped it into her pocket. That night, Mrs. Lilly lay in her bed, but sleep wouldn't come. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw quick flashes of old memories she had tried so hard to forget. She saw a younger woman, just like her, bending over fancy fabric, her fingers flying as she sewed tricky patterns. This younger woman was holding big secrets stitched right into the cloth. She saw her sister's face, heard her sister's voice. Her sister, Ruth. She felt the ghost of old arguments they used to have, arguments about what was right and wrong, about staying safe versus telling the truth. Around 3 a.m, she finally drifted off to sleep. She dreamed of a woman screaming behind a sewing machine, her hands tangled in threads that wouldn't break, fabric piling up higher and higher until it covered everything. It was a scary dream. She woke up at 4:30 a.m. to her alarm clock buzzing, just like it had for 40 years. She felt like she hadn't slept at all. The next morning started like any other morning. Mrs. Lilly walked to her shop through the same streets that were always changing around her. She unlocked the same sticky door, jiggling the key just right. She turned on the same old sewing machines, listening to them hum and clatter as they slowly warmed up. She made coffee in her small pot in the back room and tried to pretend that last night hadn't been any different. She was sweeping the floor, making sure everything was neat and tidy, when she saw them. 2 big, black, shiny cars parked across the street. Their windows were dark, so you couldn't see inside, and they didn't have any company names on them. They just sat there, waiting, like silent watchers. Even from inside her shop, Mrs. Lilly could feel their eyes on her, heavy and watching. Her hands squeezed the broom handle tighter. People on the sidewalk started to notice them too. A small crowd gathered, pulling out their phones to film and take pictures. Someone even knocked on the window of one of the black cars, but no one answered. Then, the car doors opened. 6 men stepped out. All of them wore dark suits and carried important-looking briefcases. They moved together, very smoothly and carefully, like people who did this kind of thing all the time. They didn't rush. They didn't need to. They just walked across the street, and the crowd of people parted like water, making a path for them. 3 of the men walked right up to her shop door. The knock, when it came, was polite, like a business visit, but it still felt scary. Mrs. Lilly put her broom down and walked to the door. Her legs felt wobbly, like they belonged to someone else. She flipped the lock and slowly pulled the door open just a crack. The man in front was young, maybe around 35 years old, with sharp features and even sharper eyes. He smiled, but his eyes didn't join in the smile. It wasn't a warm smile at all. "Evelyn Carter?" he asked. Mrs. Lilly's full name. "Yes, that's me," she said. "I'm David Brooks with Morrison Legal Group. These are my friends, James Miller and Rachel Stone. We need to talk to you about something you did last night." Mrs. Lilly's mouth felt dry, like sandpaper. "What did I do? May we come in?" It wasn't really a question. Mrs. Lilly stepped aside, and the 3 lawyers walked into her shop as if they owned it. The crowd outside pressed closer to the windows, still filming. Mrs. Lilly even saw someone go live on their phone, talking excitedly about something happening at the old Tailor shop. The lawyers spread out, looking at everything but not touching anything. Mr. Brooks stood in the middle of the room, setting his briefcase on her counter without even asking if he could. "Last night," he began, his voice calm and serious. "Around 6:15 p.m., a man came to your shop asking for changes to a special suit. Is that right?" "I fix clothes every day," Mrs. Lilly said carefully, trying to buy herself some time to think. "I'd have to check my records. We're especially interested in a dark gray suit jacket, made by Carlisle and Company. The customer was wearing it when he arrived. You worked on it, and he left wearing it about 3 hours later." Mrs. Lilly didn't say anything. Mr. Brooks opened his briefcase and pulled out a tablet computer. He swiped through some screens, then turned it to show her. We have security camera video from the building across the street showing him coming in and leaving. We have his credit card record showing he got money from the ATM 2 doors down right after he left. We even have proof from the customer himself that he was here. Then why are you asking me? Mrs. Lilly wondered. Rachel Stone, a woman with dark hair pulled back so tightly it looked painful, stepped forward. Because the jacket had a special secret mark, a legally registered identifier hidden inside the fabric. And that mark is now gone. The small room felt even smaller, and suddenly colder. We need to know what you changed, Mr. Brooks continued, his voice still friendly, still professional. Who told you to take out the secret mark? Did anyone pay you extra for this? Did you keep any part of the removed material? I fixed the shoulder seam, Mrs. Lilly said, sticking to her story. That's all. Did you keep any fabric scraps from the change? I cleaned up after I finished. Everything went in the trash. We'd like to look at that trash. The garbage truck came this morning. It's gone. The lawyers exchanged quick glances. Mr. Miller, who hadn't said a word yet, pulled out a camera and started taking pictures of her sewing area, her machines, her tools, and the walls. Stop that! Mrs. Lilly said sharply. We have the right to take pictures, Mr. Brooks said. Not without my permission, you don't. Just then, the door opened again. Caleb, Mrs. Lilly's grandson, pushed through, still wearing his backpack. His face was a bit red, like he had been running. Grandma, what's going on? I saw the crowd outside and... He stopped speaking when he saw the lawyers, the camera, and the tense feeling in the room. His face changed right away, becoming serious and focused. Who are you people? We are lawyers representing. I don't care who you represent, Caleb interrupted. Are you questioning my grandmother? We are just trying to understand. Is she under arrest? No. Is she being held? No. Then she doesn't have to talk to you. Caleb moved to stand right next to Mrs. Lilly, gently touching her elbow. I'm Caleb Carter, a second-year law student at Columbia University. Whatever you think my grandmother did, you can talk to her real lawyers. Mr. Brooks' friendly expression finally broke, replaced by something colder and harder. Mr. Carter, we are simply trying to understand a situation that has very important legal consequences. Your grandmother may have accidentally messed with a protected secret marking system. If she helps us now, we can solve this quietly. Accidentally messed with? Caleb repeated. With a secret marking system in a suit jacket? Do you hear how crazy that sounds? Nevertheless, it's true. Rachel Stone pulled out a paper and unfolded it on the counter. This is a temporary business shutdown order. Your grandmother's shop is temporarily closed while we look into possible violations of secret marking systems. Mrs. Carter's equipment will be tagged and sealed. No more work can be done here until this problem is solved. Mrs. Lilly felt like the floor was tilting under her feet. You can't do that. We can, and we are. Ms. Stone pulled out small sticky tags, the kind police used to mark evidence. She started placing them on Mrs. Lilly's sewing machines, her cutting table, and her steam press. Stop! Caleb said, his voice getting louder. You can't just shut down her business without. We have a court order signed by a judge 2 hours ago, Mr. Brooks said, pulling out another paper. Everything is legal. Everything is by the book. The lawyers moved quickly and efficiently, tagging equipment, taking pictures of the shop from every angle, and writing notes on their tablets. The whole thing took about 10 minutes. When they finished, Mr. Brooks handed Mrs. Lilly a thick stack of papers. You'll be contacted within 72 hours about what happens next. Until then, you are not to remove, destroy, or change any materials in this shop. You are not to talk about this publicly or try to contact our client. Do you understand? Mrs. Lilly took the papers with shaky, numb hands. She couldn't make her voice work. She understands, Caleb said coldly. The lawyers left as smoothly as they had arrived. The black cars drove away. The crowd outside slowly broke up, still filming, still posting, already turning Mrs. Lily's life into something for people on the internet who didn't even care she existed. Mrs. Lily stood in her shop, which wasn't really her shop anymore. She looked at the tags on her machines, the papers in her hands, and her grandson beside her, who was trying very hard not to let her see how scared he was. "Grandma," Caleb said softly, "what did you do?" Mrs. Lily walked to the counter and sat down heavily in the old chair she had meant to replace for years. Her hands were shaking again, and this time it had nothing to do with her arthritis. "I removed something I shouldn't have known how to find," she whispered. "Something I've spent 30 years pretending didn't exist." "What are you talking about?" She looked up at him, seeing his confusion, his worry, his strong desire to protect her from something he didn't understand. "I need to show you something," she said. "But not here. Not now. Tonight, after it gets dark, come to my apartment. And Caleb, don't tell anyone. Not your friends, not your teachers, no one." He nodded slowly, not fully understanding, but trusting her anyway. After he left, Mrs. Lily locked the door and turned off the lights. She sat alone in the darkness of her shop, listening to the familiar sounds of machines she couldn't use, surrounded by fabric she couldn't touch, holding papers that said she had broken laws she had never even heard of. She pulled out her phone and stared at it for a long, long time. Then, finally, she dialed a number she had memorized 40 years ago, but had never called. It rang 4 times before someone answered. "This is Evelyn Carter," she said, her voice steady even though everything felt like it was falling apart. "I need to get into storage unit 214, the one under Ruth Carter's name." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "That unit hasn't been opened in 31 years. "I know," Mrs. Lily said. "I'm coming tonight." She hung up before they could ask questions she didn't want to answer. Then, Mrs. Lily stood up and walked to the back room where she kept her personal things in an old, dented metal locker. She pulled out an old keyring with 3 keys on it. One for her apartment, one for her shop, and one for a storage unit containing everything she had saved from her life before this one. Everything they had forgotten to look for. Everything that proved her sister Ruth hadn't been crazy or a criminal, or just lost. Everything that proved the secret system Mrs. Lily had just accidentally uncovered was real, was huge, and was still working in the shadows of rich and powerful people. She slipped the keys into her pocket, right beside the tiny tags she had removed from the man's suit. The storage building was far across town, in a forgotten part of the city. She kept Ruth's old trunk locked away there for 3 whole decades. She paid the fee every month, never visiting. But now the lawyers had come. The tiny tag in her pocket felt heavier than it should. She thought about the man in the expensive suit, about how he had looked at her like she was invisible, until she told him what she had found. The look of understanding that had flashed across his face. He had known the system Ruth had tried to expose was still working, still stitching power into fabric where no one would ever think to look. Tomorrow, people would see the tags on her sewing machines and whisper about the old woman who had finally done something wrong. Let them whisper, she thought. She had spent too many years trying to be small and quiet. It hadn't protected her. It hadn't saved Ruth. She walked to the window of her shop. Young people streamed out of the fitness studio next door. Life moved fast around her quiet shop. But somewhere in the city, powerful people were starting to panic because one determined old black woman had recognized something she wasn't supposed to understand. Mrs. Lily smiled for the first time in days. It was the smile of someone who suddenly realized they had nothing left to lose. And for the first time in 30 long years, Mrs. Lily stopped running from the truth. The night before Mrs. Lily was going to open the storage unit, she barely slept a wink. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Ruth's face as it looked in 1987. Young, smart, and so excited about chances that seemed too good to be true. They had been so innocent back then. 2 black women from a neighborhood where good chances didn't come knocking very often, believing that being good at their work and working hard would be enough to build something that lasted. The storage building was in an old, rundown part of town that time seemed to have forgotten. Warehouses with broken windows lined the streets. Fences made of metal chains sagged around empty, dusty lots. The building itself looked like it might fall down if you leaned on it too hard. But Mrs. Lilly had picked it for that very reason 30 years ago. No one ever looked twice at places like this. No one remembered what was stored away in forgotten corners of dying neighborhoods. She arrived just after midnight, when the streets were empty, and the only light came from faraway highway signs. The manager was an old man who had worked there since before Mrs. Lilly had even rented the unit. He barely glanced at her ID, just handed her a key and pointed towards the back hallway. "Unit 214, he mumbled. "Haven't seen you here before." "I know," Mrs. Lilly replied. The hallway smelled like old metal and dusty cardboard. Her footsteps echoed loudly on the concrete floor, which was cracked from decades of hot and cold weather. Most of the storage units had rusty old padlocks on them. Some even had eviction notices taped to their doors, faded yellow papers that looked almost cream-colored now. Unit 214 was right at the very end, tucked away in a corner where the bright fluorescent lights didn't quite reach. The padlock was the same one she had put there herself in 1994, the year after Ruth had disappeared. The year Mrs. Lilly had finally accepted that her sister wasn't coming back. Her hand trembled a little as she fit the key into the lock. It turned surprisingly easily, and the metal door rolled up with a loud, screeching sound that made her jump. Inside, a single trunk sat in the darkness. It was military green, made of metal with strong corners, the kind of trunk built to survive anything. Mrs. Lilly pulled out her phone and turned on its flashlight. The beam of light cut through tiny dust particles floating in the still air. She knelt beside the trunk, feeling the cold concrete floor seep through her pants. The combination lock on the trunk was one that only she and Ruth had known. It was their mother's birthday, but backwards. Her fingers dialed the numbers automatically, like her muscles remembered how, even after all this time. The lock clicked open. Inside the trunk was everything Mrs. Lilly had saved from the years she and Ruth worked for the fancy company. There were books filled with hand-drawn sewing patterns, fabric samples glued onto cardboard, each one labeled with dates and secret customer codes. There were tool sheets, things that Ruth had secretly taken the night the company closed down. Special needles, measuring tools, and fabric pens that wrote with disappearing ink. And underneath all of that, sealed in plastic bags to keep them safe from moisture, were dozens of envelopes. Each one was marked in Ruth's neat handwriting with dates, names, and case numbers that wouldn't mean anything to anyone who didn't know their true secret. Mrs. Lilly pulled out one of the pattern books and opened it to a random page. The designs looked innocent. There were diagrams for how to build a jacket, guides for where to place seams, and charts for measurements. But Mrs. Lilly knew how to read the secret language hidden beneath the surface. The numbers that looked like measurements were actually secret legal codes. The stitch patterns were like secret messages, encrypting information. The weight of the fabrics matched up to how much money something was worth. Every piece of clothing Ruth had worked on told a story that had nothing to do with fashion. She turned to a page dated August 1986. The design showed a fancy evening jacket with very detailed sewing on the inside. Notes in Ruth's handwriting filled the empty spaces around the design. Measurements, yes, but also observations that made Mrs. Lilly's stomach feel tight even now. Customer asks for full inheritance redirect upon wearing. Secret clauses hidden in lining structure, activated by body heat. Legal review questionable. My personal opinion, this is theft dressed as tradition. Mrs. Lilly remembered that jacket. She had helped Ruth finish it, working late into the night in the studio they shared. They hadn't really understood what they were truly doing back then. They hadn't realized how big the secret was, or what the company really specialized in. She found another entry from November 1988. It was about a vest with secret stitching along the back. Finished truss modification piece. Customer asks for silent transfer mechanism for estate assets. Created dual stitch pattern that makes previous documents useless when worn during signing ceremonies. James says this is standard practice for rich families. Ruth says this is fraud. Both things can be true. Ruth had always been the one who asked questions. Mrs. Lilly had been happy just to do beautiful work and get her paycheck. But Ruth couldn't let things go. She had started keeping these notes as a kind of insurance, writing down everything they touched, building up proof of a system she suspected was bigger than any of them knew. A memory flashed into Mrs. Lilly's mind, sudden and sharp, pulling her back to 1989. They had been in the studio, just the two of them. The company employed a dozen seamstresses, but Ruth and Mrs. Lilly had their own private workspace because they were better than everyone else. The room had been beautiful. It had windows facing north, expensive equipment, and rolls of fabric that cost more than their monthly rent. Ruth had called Mrs. Lilly over to her work area, her voice tight with worry. "Look at this," she had said, holding up a suit jacket that belonged to a customer they had been told was just a simple businessman. "Tell me what you see." Mrs. Lilly had looked at how the jacket was made. "Excellent work. Is that your special reinforced shoulder technique? Look deeper," Ruth had urged, pointing at the pattern itself. And Mrs. Lilly had looked, really looked, running her fingers along the inside seams, until she felt what Ruth wanted her to notice. The stitching formed a pattern that didn't match the outside design. It was too complicated, too carefully made, too much like a code. "What is this?" Mrs. Lilly had whispered. Ruth's face had been serious and grim. "I think it's a legal trigger mechanism. I think when this man wears this jacket to sign certain papers, the pattern turns on secret rules that transfer inheritance rights to people who aren't named in any official documents." "That's impossible!" Mrs. Lilly had exclaimed. "Clothes can't do that." "Clothes can't," Ruth had agreed. "But an agreement among people who know the codes can. It's a system, Evelyn, built on trust and secrecy, and the idea that no one outside the system would ever understand what they're looking at." Mrs. Lilly had felt sick to her stomach. "We need to stop making these. We need to tell everyone about this, Ruth." "No," Mrs. Lilly had said, fear in her voice. "We need to quietly walk away and never talk about it." But Ruth hadn't been able to walk away. She had kept writing notes, kept asking questions, kept pushing until she had learned too much. Mrs. Lilly snapped back to the present, her knees aching from kneeling on the cold concrete. She reached deeper into the trunk and pulled out an envelope marked with yesterday's date. That was impossible, since Ruth had been gone for decades. But there it was, in her sister's handwriting. Except it wasn't yesterday's date from now. It was yesterday's date from 1993, the last time Mrs. Lilly had seen her sister alive. She opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in Ruth's neat writing. "Evelyn, if you're reading this, I'm either dead or I've disappeared. And you've finally decided to stop running. I'm sorry I put this heavy burden on you. I'm sorry I couldn't let it go, but someone has to know the truth. The company isn't just a sewing company. It's a way for powerful people to secretly control things. They use it for families and big businesses who need to move power around without official papers. The clothes we make are like physical keys that unlock transfers, changes, and redirects that don't exist anywhere on paper. I've spent 2 years tracing this network. It's bigger than I ever imagined. Hundreds of customers, millions of dollars in secret money, and at the center of it all is a man named Thomas Hale. He's not just a customer. He's the main person who designed the whole secret system. His company owns the patents for the special threads, the fabric treatments, the tricky sewing techniques. Everything we've been doing traces back to him. I'm going to tell everyone about this. I have enough proof to give to the police. I have names, dates, specific clothes, and proof that this system has been used to steal from rightful heirs and secretly change how companies work. If something happens to me before I can give this proof, it means they found out what I was doing. Use what's in this trunk. Finish what I started. Don't let them bury the truth along with me. I love you, sister. I'm sorry I brought you into this world, but I'm not sorry I tried to burn it all down." Mrs. Lilly's eyes filled with tears, tears she had held back for 30 long years. She carefully folded the letter and held it against her chest, finally allowing herself to cry for the sister who had been braver than she was, who had paid the ultimate price for trying to do what was right. When she finally calmed herself down, she began taking pictures of every page in the pattern books, every fabric sample, every note and drawing Ruth had saved. Her phone memory quickly filled up, so she saved copies to online storage, and sent copies to old email addresses she had set up years ago and never used. By the time the sun started to rise, she had taken pictures of everything. She put the trunk back in the storage unit, locked it, and drove home with the heavy feeling of her sister's legacy sitting in her chest. Caleb was waiting on her doorstep when she arrived. "Where have you been?" he asked, tiredness and worry making him sound a bit angry. "I've been calling you for hours." "Working," Mrs. Lilly said simply. "On what?" "Your shop is shut down, remember?" She unlocked her apartment door and motioned for him to follow her inside. Then she pulled out her phone and showed him the pictures. "Finishing something your great-aunt started a long time ago." Caleb scrolled through the images, his law school training making him understand much faster than Mrs. Lilly had expected. His eyes got wide as he started putting things together, seeing the patterns, understanding the legal problems. "Grandma," he breathed. "This is proof of huge fraud. Companies secretly manipulating things. If this is real, if this system actually exists." "It's real," Mrs. Lilly interrupted. "I've seen it with my own eyes for 40 years. And yesterday I touched it again. We need to take this to the authorities. The SEC, the FBI, someone who can... Who can what?" Mrs. Lilly's voice was sharp. "Tell me, Caleb, with your fancy law school education, what happens when a poor black woman walks into a big government office and says rich white families have been using magic clothes to steal inheritances?" Caleb's mouth closed. He looked at the photos again, and she watched as he started to see the big problem. No matter how strong the proof, no matter how clear the patterns, there was no official way to bring charges against something like this. The system existed in the empty spaces between laws, in the places where informal agreements and family traditions worked without any written documents. "So what do we do?" he asked finally. "We wait," Mrs. Lilly said. "Because the people who run this system know I touched something I shouldn't have. They're watching me, and eventually they'll make a mistake." She didn't have to wait long. 3 days after the lawyers shut down her shop, Mrs. Lilly had spent 72 hours sleeping badly and checking her phone for news that never came. Then, someone knocked on her shop door at 7 o'clock in the morning. She was inside, sweeping, unable to stay away even though her equipment had legal tags on it, even though she knew she wasn't supposed to be working. Her shop was her life. She couldn't just leave it because some lawyer said it was a crime scene. Through the window, she saw him. The man from that night, the one whose suit had started everything. He stood alone this time. No phone pressed to his ear. No pacing back and forth. He looked smaller somehow, less bossy, though his clothes were still fancy enough to pay her rent for a whole year. Mrs. Lilly thought about not opening the door. She thought about calling Caleb, or the lawyers or someone who could see whatever was about to happen. Instead, she unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open about 6 inches. "We're closed," she said. "I know." His voice was different too. Quieter, almost unsure. "I'm not here for alterations." "Then what are you here for?" He glanced at the street behind him, checking for people watching or cameras. Mrs. Lilly couldn't tell which. "To talk to someone who understands what I'm carrying." "May I come in?" Every instinct Mrs. Lilly had learned over 68 years of surviving in a world that didn't care much for her told her to say no. But her curiosity was stronger than her caution. She stepped back and let him enter. He walked to the middle of her shop and stood there, looking at the tagged equipment, the photographs on the walls, the mannequins wearing her work. Then he turned to face her, and for the first time, he really looked at her. He saw her. He acknowledged her as a person who mattered. "My name is Thomas Hale," he said. "And I think you knew my sister better than I did." Mrs. Lilly's breath caught. "What?" "Ruth Carter." She worked for my company in the late 80s and early 90s. She was brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. The best textile architect we ever had. Textile architect. Mrs. Lilly repeated the fancy company word that made her feel sick. Is that what you called her? It's what she was. It's what you were too, though I suspect you've spent decades trying to forget it. Mrs. Lilly's hand found the counter behind her, needing something to hold on to. Your Thomas Hale? Yes, the Thomas Hale. The one Ruth was going to expose. His face tightened with something that looked like sadness or pain. The one she tried to expose. The one who failed to protect her when she became a threat to people more powerful than me. You let them kill her, Mrs. Lilly accused, her voice filled with a lifetime of pain. I didn't let them do anything. I didn't know what they had done until it was too late. Thomas moved closer, very carefully, like he was approaching someone who might suddenly run away. I've spent 30 years trying to find out what happened to Ruth. I've spent 30 years trying to break apart pieces of the system she died trying to expose. And 3 days ago, you removed a stitch pattern from my jacket that I had put there specifically to test whether the system was still working. Mrs. Lilly stared at him. You wanted me to find it. I've been tracking seamstresses who worked with Ruth. There aren't many left. Most have died or disappeared or changed their names, like you did. When I learned Evelyn Ruth Carter was running a small shop in this neighborhood, I knew it had to be you. Ruth talked about her sister constantly. She showed me pictures. She told me you were even more talented than she was, but too careful to use your skills the way she did. Cautious, Mrs. Lilly said bitterly. Is that what you call it? I was smart enough to stay alive. Yes, you were. Thomas pulled out his phone and showed her a photograph. This is what happened when you removed that stitch pattern. The picture showed what looked like an important company document, except parts of it were blacked out, censored by some automatic computer system. Whole paragraphs were missing, replaced by red error messages. What am I looking at? Mrs. Lilly asked. A document that was supposed to activate yesterday morning. It would have transferred control of my company to a group of people who have been trying to get rid of me for 5 years. The transfer only happened if I wore specific clothes to a specific meeting at a specific time. Clothes coded with secret triggers that would prove the transfer was real. And I removed the trigger. Mrs. Lilly finished. You did more than that. You rewrote the inside structure of the jacket so completely that the entire secret verification system flagged it as broken. The transfer didn't just fail. It showed the secret mechanism to company auditors who had never seen anything like it before. Thomas swiped to another picture. This one showed what looked like a big meeting room, but the table was covered in fabric samples, magnifying glasses, and tools for checking things. My company has been in chaos for 3 days. Lawyers are arguing about whether clothes-based secret systems have any legal standing. Auditors are demanding to see decades of old clothes. Board members are quitting before they can be questioned about what they knew. And at the center of all of it is a simple question. Who taught these methods to our sewing contractors? Ruth did, Mrs. Lilly said quietly. She designed half the systems your company used, and then she tried to tell everyone how those systems were being used for bad things. I know. I've always known. Thomas put his phone away. His shoulders sagged under a heavy weight. Mrs. Lilly was only just beginning to understand. Ruth came to me the week before she disappeared. She told me what she had discovered about how the secret systems were being misused. She told me board members were using secretly changed clothes to make decisions that weren't officially recorded, to transfer money that wasn't declared, to control company operations without leaving any paper trails. And you didn't believe her. I believed her, but I didn't have proof. And I didn't have the courage to act just on belief. His voice cracked slightly. She said she was going to the government authorities. She said she had proof that would bring down not just my company but dozens of others using the same systems. I tried to convince her to work within the company, to let me investigate internally. We argued. She left angry. And then she vanished. And then she vanished, Mrs. Lilly repeated. Her car was found near a government building. Her apartment had been cleaned out. Every document, every pattern book, every piece of proof she had collected was gone. The official investigation said she had probably run away to avoid legal problems for spying on the company. But you didn't believe that? Of course not. Ruth wouldn't run. She would fight until there was nothing left to fight with. Thomas looked directly at Mrs. Lilly, and she saw real sadness in his eyes. I've spent 3 decades trying to find proof of what happened to her, trying to expose the people who silenced her. And I've failed again and again, because I'm fighting against people who have learned to hide their tracks perfectly. Mrs. Lilly wanted to hate this man. She wanted to blame him for Ruth's death, for the decades of silence, for the system that had swallowed her sister whole. But she had spent too many years learning to recognize the truth when she heard it. And Thomas Hale was telling the truth. Why did you come to my shop? She asked. Why now? Because the board is making another move. They've been planning it for 5 years, slowly putting pieces into place, buying loyalty, building legal ways to push me out and give them complete control. The stitch pattern you removed was supposed to be the final trigger. With it gone, their plan has fallen apart, but they're not stopping. They're speeding up, getting desperate. What does that have to do with me? Thomas pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket and held it out to her. Because they know who you are now. They know you recognize the system. They know you must have learned it from Ruth, and they're terrified of what else Ruth might have told you before she died. Mrs. Lilly took the envelope with numb fingers. Inside was an official legal document, full of complicated company language she barely understood, but Caleb would understand it. She was sure of that. What is this? She asked. A court order filed by my own board against me, asking for an investigation into whether I've been using unauthorized secret systems to maintain control of my company. They're using your existence, your knowledge, as proof that the system is compromised. They're saying I've been secretly working with outside people, meaning you, to manipulate how the company is run. That's crazy. I haven't worked with anyone. Truth doesn't matter when you're fighting people who've built their careers on hidden systems and secret agreements. They're going to destroy both of us unless we can expose them first. Thomas stepped closer, his voice dropping to something urgent and desperate. I need to know what Ruth saved, what proof she collected, what evidence exists that this system is real and that it's been used for bad things for decades. Mrs. Lilly thought about the trunk in the storage unit, about the pattern books and fabric samples and envelopes full of documents that Ruth had spent years putting together. She thought about the letter her sister had written, knowing she might not survive to deliver the proof herself. If I help you, Mrs. Lilly said slowly, what happens to my shop? What happens to my grandson who's building a career in law? What happens to the quiet life I've built by staying invisible? Thomas's face became serious, showing a strong determination. Your quiet life ended the moment you touched my jacket. I'm sorry, I truly am, but there's no going back now. The board has already targeted you. The only question is whether we fight back together or whether we both go down separately. Mrs. Lilly walked to the window and looked out at the street that had changed so much around her tiny shop. She thought about Ruth, who had refused to stay quiet even when silence would have saved her. She thought about all the years she had spent hiding, convinced that being invisible was the same thing as being safe. Maybe she had been wrong. She turned back to Thomas Hale, this rich man who had let her sister die and then spent decades trying to make up for the fear he could never take back. I kept everything, she said. Every pattern Ruth designed, every note she made, every piece of proof she collected about your precious system and how it was being misused. Everything they forgot to look for when they erased her. Thomas's eyes widened. Where? Safe. Hidden. Documented. Mrs. Lilly pulled out her phone and showed him a few of the photographs she had taken. And if you want access to it, we do this my way. Not as your employee, not as someone you're protecting or using. As partners. Equals. Ruth died trying to expose this system. I won't let her proof be buried a second time just because it makes powerful men uncomfortable. For a long moment, Thomas just stared at the photographs on her phone. Then he looked up at her, and something like respect crossed his face. "You're exactly like she described," he said softly. "Stronger than she was in all the ways that mattered." No, Ruth was stronger. She just didn't survive long enough for people to realize it. I'm just the one who's still alive to finish what she started. Thomas held out his hand. Then let's finish it together. Mrs. Lilly looked at his hand for a long moment, thinking about trust and risk and the cost of staying silent versus the cost of speaking up. Then she reached out and shook it, forming an alliance she never wanted but couldn't avoid. "I need guarantees," she said. "Real ones. Name them. My grandson stays protected. Caleb finishes law school and builds his career. No damage to his future." Thomas nodded. "Agreed. What else?" "My shop. Equipment returned. The shutdown order lifted. Done. And Ruth. I want the truth about what happened to her. A real investigation. Real accountability." Thomas's face became serious. "The people who silence Ruth are powerful. Even if we expose the system, it will be hard to bring them down completely. Then we burn it down completely." Mrs. Lilly interrupted. "We make them choose between confessing or destroying each other." A slow smile spread across Thomas's face. "You've been thinking about this for 30 years. Mrs. Lilly pulled her hand back and crossed her arms. "Ruth died trying to expose this legally, through the proper channels. It didn't work. They silenced her before she could even file her report. So, we're not going to be polite. We're going to make it impossible for anyone to ignore what's been happening." Thomas studied her face, rethinking everything. "I underestimated you. Everyone does. That's how I've survived." Mrs. Lilly pulled out a notebook. "I've been writing down everything since your lawyers showed up. Names, patterns, your company's structure." Thomas looked at her notes, his eyebrows going up. "Where did you learn this?" "From Caleb's textbooks. From paying attention for 3 decades. She met his eyes. "Ruth taught me how power really works." "I believe you," Thomas said. "What's your plan?" Mrs. Lilly took a deep breath. "First, we take pictures of everything in Ruth's trunk. A full professional analysis. Experts who can say it's all real. I can arrange that. Second, we map out the network. Every customer Ruth wrote about. We show the pattern is bigger than just your company." Thomas hesitated. "That will make powerful enemies." "I know." Third, we find allies, reporters, prosecutors, people who wanted to break into these secret networks but never had proof. And fourth, we use your company as the example. We show exactly how clothes were used as secret verification systems. We make your company the case study that proves the entire system exists." Thomas winced. "That will destroy my company's reputation." "Yes," Mrs. Lilly said without sympathy. "But it will force government agencies to investigate. Ruth died trying to expose this. Your temporary embarrassment doesn't matter more than her sacrifice." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. "You're right. We have to be willing to lose everything. No halfway measures." "Agreed," Mrs. Lilly said. Thomas looked around her shop, at the evidence tags, at the photographs. When he looked back, his expression had changed. "Ruth believed I was a coward. She was right. I chose loyalty to the company over the truth. I won't make that mistake twice." "Words are easy," Mrs. Lilly said. "Then watch what I do." Thomas pulled out his phone and made a call on speaker. "This is Daniel Ross from Morrison Legal." Mrs. Lilly recognized the name. One of the lawyers who had questioned her. "Daniel, it's Thomas Hale. I'm ending your firm's contract right now." Silence. Then, "Mr. Hale, I don't think. Your firm scared a witness who has proof of fraud. You're fired." Thomas hung up. He looked at Mrs. Lilly. "Satisfied?" "It's a start," she said, feeling something loosen in her chest. They spent the next hour planning. Thomas would find special experts. Mrs. Lilly would get Caleb ready for legal battles. Together, they would find reporters and prosecutors. When Thomas left, Mrs. Lilly locked the door and stood in her shop. For the first time in 30 years, she felt like she was truly fighting. She called Caleb. "Grandma, everything okay?" "Better than okay. Come tonight. Bring your notes. We have work to do." "What kind of work?" "The kind your great-aunt Ruth would be proud of. The kind that changes everything." Outside, people walked past her shop without looking, seeing nothing worth their attention. They had no idea the quiet woman who fixed their hems was about to expose secret systems that rich families had hidden for generations. Sometimes the most dangerous people aren't the ones who shout. They're the ones who finally stop staying quiet. After Thomas left her shop with promises of experts and resources, Mrs. Lilly made good on her word. That evening, with Caleb beside her, tapping notes into his laptop, she laid out everything Ruth had kept safe in that storage unit trunk. The pattern books came first. Caleb's eyes grew wide as he flipped through pages of designs that looked perfectly normal until you understood the secret code beneath them. Numbers that pretended to be measurements but were actually secret legal clauses. Stitch patterns that matched up to millions of dollars in hidden money. "This is insane," Caleb breathed, scrolling through the photographs Mrs. Lilly had taken. "These aren't just clothes. They're portable contracts." "Portable and deniable," Mrs. Lilly corrected. "That's what made the system so powerful. No paper trail, no digital records, just fabric and thread and secret agreements that only existed between people who knew how to read them." She showed him a fabric sample Ruth had glued onto cardboard, dated March 1991. The stitching formed such a complex pattern it looked like fancy embroidery. But when Caleb looked closely, following Mrs. Lilly's guidance, he could see the careful, intentional structure. "This matches up to voting proxies," he said slowly, his legal training kicking in. "If I'm reading this right, whoever wore this garment could cast votes for shareholders who weren't even there in person. Without any official documents," Mrs. Lilly confirmed. "The garment itself was the permission. As long as the right people recognized the code, the vote counted." Caleb sat back, running his hands through his hair. "Grandma, if this is real, if companies have actually been doing things this way, we're talking about massive fraud, stealing money and secretly manipulating things on a huge scale. Corporate governance violations that could make decades of business decisions worthless. I know courts are going to be busy for years. Government agencies will have to invent entirely new rules. This isn't just exposing one company. This is challenging the very basic ideas about how corporate power works." Mrs. Lilly pulled out another set of documents. These showed Ruth's careful work, her analysis of the entire secret network. Her sister had been incredibly thorough, tracking connections between customers, finding patterns in how the secret systems were used, building a map of influence that spread across dozens of big companies and rich families. "Ruth spent 2 years putting this together," Mrs. Lilly said quietly. "She worked late nights after everyone else left the studio. She photographed every piece of clothing she touched, wrote down every customer conversation she overheard, saved samples of every garment that passed through her hands." "Why didn't she just go to the police right away?" Caleb asked. "Because she knew they wouldn't believe her. A black seamstress accusing rich white families of using magic clothes to commit fraud? She would have been laughed out of every office she walked into." Mrs. Lilly's voice hardened. "So she built a base of proof so thorough, so well documented, that it would be impossible to just brush aside. And then she tried to give it to federal investigators. And they killed her for it," Caleb finished. "Someone did. We just don't know who yet." They worked through the night, organizing Ruth's materials into groups that would make sense to investigators and reporters. Financial tricks, voting systems, inheritance changes, secret money transfers. Each group had dozens of examples. Each example had dates and customer codes. Each code could potentially be traced back to real people and real companies. By dawn, Caleb had created a special computer database for tracking everything. He had also written first drafts of legal papers explaining the possible law-breaking and the rules that should have stopped them but didn't. "I need to show this to Professor Williams," he said, talking about his corporate law teacher. "She knows a lot about money fraud. She'll know which prosecutors to talk to." "Not yet," Mrs. Lilly warned. "We wait for Thomas to bring his experts. We need other people to confirm this before we start talking to the authorities. Otherwise, it's still just an old woman's story." Thomas arrived at noon with 3 people. There was a history expert on fabrics from a big university, a special analyst who checked if documents were real, and a corporate lawyer named Sarah Bennett who had spent her career investigating crimes committed by white-collar professionals. They set up in Mrs. Lilly's small apartment, spreading Ruth's materials across every table and chair. The historian carefully examined the pattern books with gloved hands, taking pictures of pages and comparing sewing techniques to known samples from the 1980s and 90s. The forensic analyst tested the fabric samples for age, checking the paper and ink to make sure the dates Ruth had written down were real. Sarah Bennett focused on the legal tricks, checking Ruth's notes against company structures and ownership records. She worked with intense concentration, occasionally making quiet sounds of surprise as she found connections that Ruth had documented decades earlier. After 6 hours, they gathered around Mrs. Lilly's kitchen table to share what they had found. The historian spoke first. "The pattern books are real. The techniques shown match documented methods from very fancy sewing houses operating in the 1980s. Several of the patterns have special marks that match known seamstresses from that time, and the way the difficulty grows over time shows real skill development, not something made up later." The forensic analyst nodded. "The materials all test consistent with their claimed dates. Paper aging, ink composition, fabric decay, everything matches. These documents are at least 30 years old. No one created them recently to support a false story." Sarah Bennett's expression was grim. "And the legal tricks Ruth documented are real. I've checked her customer codes against company records. The timing of her documented work matches exactly with major company decisions, ownership transfers, and board votes at many companies. Decisions that look like they happened through normal ways, but that Ruth's notes suggest were actually decided beforehand through these secret authentication systems." "So it's all real," Thomas said quietly. "Everything Ruth tried to tell me. Everything she died for, it's all documented and verified." "It's real," Sarah confirmed. "But proving it in court is going to be incredibly difficult. These systems operated in legal gray areas. There's no explicit law against using clothes as secret." Verification. The fraud comes from the lack of telling everyone, from the secret nature of the agreements, from the way these systems were used to get around normal company rules. "What do we need to prove it?" Caleb asked. "Testimony from people who were part of the system. Documents showing they knew and intended to do this. Proof that decisions made through these secret mechanisms wouldn't have been made if proper procedures had been followed," Sarah said, pulling out a legal pad covered in notes. "And we need a case study, one company where we can show the full extent of how these systems worked, where we can draw clear lines from hidden secret systems to specific decisions to clear harm." Everyone looked at Thomas. "My company," he said. "We use my company as the example." "That will destroy you," Sarah warned. "Your reputation, your business relationships, possibly your personal freedom if prosecutors decide you knowingly participated in fraud." "I didn't knowingly participate," Thomas said flatly. "Maybe not in the worst abuses. Maybe not in what happened to Ruth, but I built the systems. I allowed the methods. I profited from the secrecy. If exposing that is what it takes to bring down the whole network, then that's what happens." Mrs. Lilly studied his face, looking for any sign of doubt or wanting to protect himself. She found none. Whatever else Thomas Hale was, he seemed truly committed to burning down what he had helped create. "Then we need a strategy," she said. "Sarah, what's our best way forward?" The lawyer thought for a moment. "We need to force public disclosure before the board can bury everything. That means going to the press first, creating enough public pressure that government agencies have to investigate. Once investigations start, we use Ruth's documentation to guide prosecutors toward the evidence they need. Who do we talk to? Caleb asked. I have contacts at the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, investigative reporters who've been looking for ways into these elite networks for years. They'll jump at this story. And if the board tries to stop us? Caleb asked. They will try, Sarah said. They'll file court orders, claim trade secrets, threaten lawsuits for defamation and corporate espionage. They'll use every legal tool available to silence this story before it breaks. Then we move fast, Thomas said. We give the journalists everything at once. Full access to Ruth's materials, expert verification, corporate records that I can provide as the founder. We make it impossible for them to write anything less than a comprehensive expose. They spent the next week getting everything ready. Sarah reached out to journalists, setting up meetings under strict confidentiality agreements. The experts wrote detailed reports confirming Ruth's materials were real and explaining the huge implications of the secret authentication systems. Caleb built a digital archive of everything, making extra copies stored in multiple secure places. And Mrs. Lilly sat with Ruth's pattern books, remembering her sister's hands creating these designs, remembering arguments they'd had about right and wrong, remembering the last time she had seen Ruth alive. I'm going to finish what you started, she whispered to the photograph of Ruth she kept on her dresser. I'm going to make them see what they did. The story broke on a Tuesday morning. It was on the front page of the New York Times, right at the top, with a big headline. Hidden Authentication Systems: How Elite Families Use Coded Garments to Control Corporate Empires. The article was incredibly powerful and shocking. It explained the basic idea of secret clothing-based verification, provided verified examples from Ruth's documents, and detailed how Thomas Hale's company had been built around these hidden systems. It included what the experts had said, company records, and specific times when board decisions seemed to have been made secretly through mechanisms that weren't written down anywhere officially. By noon, the story had been picked up everywhere. Cable news channels ran segments trying to explain how clothes could act as legal contracts. Social media exploded with guesses and accusations. Financial markets reacted strongly, with the stock prices of companies mentioned in the article dropping sharply. And then, lawsuits started. Thomas's board filed an emergency court order trying to stop any more secret information from being revealed. 3 other big companies mentioned in the article sued the New York Times for damaging their reputations. Law firms representing rich families sent scary letters claiming invasion of privacy and breaking of secret agreements. But the secret was out. The genie was out of the bottle, as they say. The government's Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, announced an investigation into how companies mentioned in the article were run. The FBI started a probe into possible money fraud. Congress planned special meetings to talk about it. Government agencies that had never even thought about clothes-based secret systems scrambled to figure out how they could investigate this. And through it all, Mrs. Lilly's small shop remained closed, tagged with legal notices, a symbol of how powerful people tried to silence those who threatened their secrets. 2 weeks after the story broke, Mrs. Lilly received a special legal paper called a subpoena. She was being called to testify before a grand jury, a group of people investigating possible fraud at Thomas's company. The board had successfully argued that any investigation should start with the people who had exposed the system, not with the system itself. They're trying to make you the criminal, Caleb said, reading through the subpoena papers. They're going to argue you secretly worked with Thomas to make up evidence and hurt the company's reputation. Let them argue, Mrs. Lilly said calmly. I have the truth on my side. Truth doesn't always win in court, Grandma. Then we make it win. Sarah Bennett helped Mrs. Lilly get ready for her testimony. They practiced questions that prosecutors might ask, rehearsed how to explain the secret systems in words that regular people on a jury could understand, and planned how to handle attempts to make her look bad, like a bitter old former employee seeking revenge. But Mrs. Lilly didn't need much coaching. She had spent 30 years thinking about what she would say if anyone ever asked about Ruth. She had practiced this testimony in her mind 10,000 times. The grand jury hearing was secret, not open to the public, but word leaked out immediately. Mrs. Lilly spent 6 hours answering questions, guiding the prosecutors through Ruth's documents, explaining how the secret systems worked and why they broke company rules. She didn't start with complicated technical details. She started with being 19 years old, talented with a needle, desperate for chances that didn't come easily to young black women in her neighborhood. She talked about being hired by a company that promised good money for skilled work, not understanding until later that the work itself was morally wrong. She talked about Ruth, her brilliant, stubborn, brave sister who had refused to stay quiet when she understood what they were really making, who had spent years writing down evidence of corruption because she believed the system would work if only someone provided enough proof. "My sister believed in justice," Mrs. Lilly said, her voice steady even though tears were running down her face. "She believed that truth mattered more than power. She believed that if she could just show people what was happening, they would do the right thing and stop it." "And what happened to your sister?" the prosecutor, a young woman named Jennifer Hayes, asked gently. "She tried to bring this evidence to federal authorities. And then she disappeared. Her car was found, her apartment was cleaned out. Every piece of documentation she'd collected was gone, and the official investigation concluded she'd probably run away to avoid prosecution for corporate espionage." Mrs. Lilly looked directly at the grand jury. "But I know my sister. Ruth didn't run from anything in her life. Someone silenced her. Someone with enough power to make a person disappear and enough influence to make sure no one looked too hard for answers." "Do you know who?" "Not yet. But everything in Ruth's documentation points to people who benefited from keeping these systems secret. People who'd built fortunes on hidden authentication mechanisms. People who couldn't afford to let Ruth expose how they'd been manipulating corporate structures for decades." The prosecutor pulled out one of Ruth's pattern books. "Can you explain this specific design to the jury?" Mrs. Lilly walked them through it. A vest designed in 1989, ordered by a customer Ruth had coded as Executive F. The stitching pattern had hidden voting proxies that would allow the wearer to cast votes for shareholders who weren't actually present at meetings. Ruth's notes indicate this vest was worn to 3 separate shareholder meetings, Mrs. Lilly explained. Meetings where major decisions were made about company direction, how much executives got paid, and company mergers. Decisions that appeared to pass with wide shareholder support, but that Ruth believed were actually decided beforehand through votes cast by someone wearing this garment. And there's no official record of these proxy arrangements. None. That's what made the system work. The agreements existed only between people who understood the code. Everyone else saw normal shareholder meetings, normal company rules, normal business decisions. But they weren't normal. "No," the prosecutor said. "They were fraud dressed up as tradition." The grand jury came back with their decision. They decided to officially indict 7 board members and 5 executives from companies that had used the secret authentication systems. The accusations ranged from money fraud to secretly working together to break company rules. Legal experts called it one of the biggest white-collar crime cases in decades. But they also accused Thomas Hale. The prosecutors argued that as the person who designed these systems, he was responsible for how they had been used, even if he hadn't personally done the worst bad things. They accused him of fraud, not telling important information, and secretly working to manipulate company structures through undocumented mechanisms. Sarah Bennett was very angry. "They're making an example of Thomas because he cooperated. They're punishing the person who helped expose the corruption instead of focusing on the people who abused it." "No," Thomas said quietly. "They're holding me accountable for what I built. That's appropriate and necessary. You helped us. You provided evidence against yourself. You've been working to dismantle these systems at great personal cost. After profiting from them for decades," Thomas countered. "After failing to protect Ruth when she tried to expose them 30 years ago. After choosing comfort over courage at every opportunity that mattered." Thomas looked exhausted but determined. "I'm not a victim here, Sarah. I'm complicit in systems that defrauded shareholders, cheated heirs, and corrupted corporate governance across multiple industries. If taking responsibility means facing prosecution, then that's exactly what I deserve to do. The trial was scheduled for 6 months later. In the meantime, the story continued to grow and spread across news outlets worldwide. More companies were identified as having used the secret authentication systems. More victims came forward with their stories. Heirs who had been cheated out of inheritances through mechanisms they never understood. Shareholders whose votes had been stolen by people wearing coded garments. Executives who had been pushed out through hidden processes that existed nowhere in official corporate records. And Mrs. Lily's small shop finally reopened for business. The court order was finally lifted after prosecutors decided she wasn't a threat to their ongoing investigation. The equipment tags were removed. Mrs. Lily cleaned and oiled her machines, restocked her supplies, and hung a new sign in the window. Carter's Tailoring, where truth is the only pattern that matters. Customers came slowly at first, curious about the old woman who had exposed billion-dollar corruption. Some wanted to shake her hand. Some wanted to hear the story firsthand. A few actually brought clothes that needed mending. Caleb stopped by one afternoon, finding her at her sewing machine, working on a simple hem. "Grandma, you know you don't have to do this anymore, right? Thomas set up a fund. You're financially secure for the rest of your life." "I know. So why are you still here, still sewing hems for $5? Mrs. Lily finished the stitch and cut the thread with practiced precision. "Because this is honest work. Because I spent too many years making beautiful things that hid ugly secrets. Because every time I sew something now, I know it's exactly what it appears to be. Nothing hidden, nothing coded, just fabric and thread and the simple truth of making something useful." She held up the pants she had just finished. "These belong to Mrs. Patterson. She needs them for her grandson's wedding. When she wears them, they're just pants. They don't control anything. They don't hide anything. They're just what she needs them to be." Caleb smiled. "The legal team wants you to know you'll be a star witness at the trial. Your testimony to the grand jury was powerful. The prosecutors think you might be the key to winning convictions. Then I'll testify as many times as they need me to." Mrs. Lily folded the pants carefully and set them aside for Mrs. Patterson to pick up. "But after the trial, I'm done with all of this. I'm going back to being invisible. Back to doing simple work for simple people. Back to a life where the most important thing I do each day is make sure someone's hem is straight. Is that really enough for you?" Mrs. Lily looked around her shop, at the machines she had spent a lifetime working on, at the photographs of her younger self, at the space where she had built a quiet life after running from a loud past. "It's more than enough," she said. Ruth wanted to change the world. She wanted to expose corruption and force powerful people to face consequences. And now that's happening. Her work is finally being seen. Her sacrifice is finally meaning something because you refuse to stay silent. Because I finally understood that silence and safety aren't the same thing. That hiding doesn't protect you from the systems that crush people like Ruth. That sometimes the only way to survive is to fight back. Even when fighting back means losing everything you've built. Mrs. Lily stood and walked to the window, looking out at the street that continued its routine without caring about billion-dollar trials or hidden authentication systems. "Ruth was braver than me," she said softly. "She always was, but I'm the one who's still alive to tell her story. So, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to testify. I'm going to show everyone what she discovered. I'm going to make sure the people who silenced her finally face consequences. And then I'm going to come back to this shop, and I'm going to sew hems, and I'm going to live quietly because that's what Ruth would want. Not for me to become famous or powerful or important. Just for me to be free, to do honest work without fear, to build a life that doesn't require hiding." She turned back to Caleb, her expression soft but certain. "That's what real victory looks like. Not headlines or convictions or corporate executives in handcuffs. Just the simple freedom to be exactly who you are without having to run from what you know." Outside, people walked past her window. Some glanced in, recognizing the shop from news coverage. Most kept walking, focused on their own lives, their own problems. And inside, an old woman prepared to testify about systems most people never knew existed. Systems her sister had died trying to expose. Systems that would finally, after 3 decades, face the truth in open court, where the quiet voice of an old seamstress would speak louder than all the power that had tried to silence her. The threat started 3 weeks before the trial. First came anonymous letters delivered to Mrs. Lily's shop, warning her that testifying would have bad consequences. Then her apartment building received calls claiming she was dangerous, leading to complaints from neighbors who had never spoken to her before. Someone even broke her shop window, spray painting scary words that made people passing by stop and stare. Thomas immediately arranged protection. 2 security guards were stationed outside her building, another watching her shop. Mrs. Lily hated it. Hated the attention. Hated feeling like she needed protection just for telling the truth. "Your world is too loud," she told Thomas when he came to check on her. "Too much noise, too many people watching. I just want to do my work." "I know. I'm sorry. After the trial, this will calm down." "Will it?" Mrs. Lily asked. "Or will there always be someone trying to silence what Ruth discovered?" Thomas had no answer for that. Sarah Bennett brought news that changed everything. She had been digging through old company records, documents that had been sealed away for decades, and she had found something incredible. Ruth didn't just document the authentication systems. Sarah explained, spreading papers across Mrs. Lily's kitchen table. She designed a fail-safe. A pattern that could make every control garment ever produced completely useless. Mrs. Lily leaned forward, studying the designs. She recognized Ruth's handwriting, the careful precision of her technical drawings, the brilliance of her structural thinking. A transfer nullification stitch. Mrs. Lily breathed. She actually figured out how to do it. "What does that mean?" Caleb asked. "It means Ruth created a counter-pattern," Sarah explained. "Something that could be sewn into new garments that would override the authentication codes in existing ones. Like a universal key that opens every lock, except this one breaks the locks permanently." Sarah nodded. If someone wore a garment with this pattern to a meeting where authentication systems were being used, those systems would fail. The codes wouldn't work. The hidden mechanisms would be exposed as non-functional. "Why didn't you use it?" Thomas asked quietly. Mrs. Lily found the answer in Ruth's notes, written in the margins of the design. Because using it would have required help from someone inside the system. Someone with access to the right meetings, the right customers, the right moments. Ruth was planning to bring this to federal investigators along with everything else. She thought they could use it as part of a controlled operation to expose the networks. But she never got the chance. "No," Caleb finished. She tried to submit her evidence, and someone stopped her. Mrs. Lily's hands trembled as she held her sister's final design. This is what they were really afraid of. Not just exposure. Complete dismantlement. Ruth didn't want to just fix the system. She wanted to destroy it so thoroughly it could never be rebuilt. Sarah's expression was grim. "This changes the stakes. If we demonstrate this failsafe in court, if we show that Ruth had the capability to make all authentication systems useless, it gives a strong reason for her disappearance. It proves someone had a reason to silence her permanently." "Can we prove who?" Mrs. Lily asked. "Maybe. I've been checking company records from 1993. 3 companies had major decisions that depended on authentication systems scheduled within weeks of Ruth's disappearance. Decisions worth hundreds of millions of dollars. If Ruth had activated her failsafe, those decisions would have fallen apart. "Which companies?" Sarah listed them. One was Thomas's. One was a big financial services company. One was a family trust managing wealth that had been passed down for generations. "We need to investigate everyone involved in those decisions," Caleb said. "Board members, executives, trustees." Someone gave the order. Someone made Ruth disappear. But that investigation would have to wait. The trial was starting. The courthouse was surrounded by media trucks and people protesting. Some supported the prosecution, demanding accountability for corporate corruption. Others waved signs claiming the whole investigation was a witch hunt against successful businesses. Police barricades kept the crowd separated. Mrs. Lilly walked through it all with Caleb on one arm and Sarah on the other. Her head was held high despite the cameras flashing and reporters shouting questions. She wore a simple dress she had made herself, navy blue with careful stitching. Every scene was straight and honest. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Reporters filled the seating area. Sketch artists positioned themselves for clear views. The defendants sat at their tables in expensive suits, surrounded by legal teams that probably cost more per hour than Mrs. Lilly made in a month. Thomas sat separately from the board members and executives, acknowledging his role, but refusing to be grouped with people who had abused what he had built. His lawyer was a public defender, his choice. He wanted to prove he wasn't using wealth to escape consequences. The trial took 3 weeks. Prosecutors presented Ruth's documents, expert testimony about the authentication systems, and company records showing undisclosed control mechanisms. Defense attorneys argued the systems were simply traditional practices, informal agreements between trusted parties that harmed no one and broke no explicit laws. But the evidence was overwhelming: fabric samples that matched company decisions, pattern books that predicted ownership transfers months before they officially occurred, testimony from victims who had lost inheritances or been pushed out of companies through votes they never knew were cast. And then Mrs. Lilly took the stand. The courtroom was absolutely silent as she was sworn in. She didn't dress up for the cameras or try to look like anything other than what she was. She wore a simple dress from her shop, navy blue with careful stitching. Every scene was straight and honest. Her hands shook slightly as she sat down, arthritis making the movement stiff and painful. She didn't speak in the dramatic way television lawyers did. She spoke in the same quiet voice she had used for 68 years. The voice of someone who had spent a lifetime being overlooked and had learned that truth didn't need volume to carry weight. "I'm here to tell you about my sister Ruth," she started, looking directly at the jury. "Not about corporate structures or legal mechanisms or authentication systems. About a woman who believed that truth mattered more than power. Who spent years documenting corruption because she thought the right people would care if they just knew what was happening." The prosecutor, Jennifer Hayes, guided her through Ruth's story with gentle questions: their childhood in a neighborhood where opportunities were scarce, their recruitment by the tailoring firm that promised good money for skilled work, the slow, creeping realization of what they were really making with their talented hands. "When did you understand what the authentication systems really meant?" Hayes asked. 1989, Mrs. Lilly said. "Ruth showed me a vest she'd been working on. The client had been very specific about the interior construction, insisting on patterns that made no sense structurally. Ruth had figured out the stitching was actually encoding voting proxies. That whoever wore that vest could cast votes on behalf of shareholders who weren't present at meetings." "What was your reaction?" "I wanted to quit immediately, walk away, and pretend we'd never seen anything. Ruth wanted to document everything and expose it. We argued about it constantly. I thought staying quiet would keep us safe. Ruth knew that safety built on silence wasn't real safety at all." "Can you tell the jury about the last time you saw your sister?" Mrs. Lilly's voice wavered but didn't break. "It was a Tuesday evening in March 1993. She came to my apartment with boxes full of documentation, pattern books, fabric samples, photographs, notes she'd been keeping for years. She said she was taking everything to federal investigators the next morning. She asked me to come with her to testify about what we'd seen and made. What did you say?" I said no. I told her she was going to get us both killed. That powerful people didn't let you expose them without consequences. That we were just seamstresses and nobody would believe us anyway." Tears ran down Mrs. Lilly's face now, but her voice remained steady. She looked at me with so much disappointment. She said fear was exactly what they counted on. That powerful people stayed powerful because everyone was too afraid to challenge them. That someone had to be brave enough to say, "No. This is wrong. This has to stop. What were her exact last words to you? Mrs. Lilly closed her eyes, remembering. She said, "I'd rather die standing up than live my whole life on my knees." And Evelyn, you're strong enough to stand too. You just don't know it yet. And the next day? The next day she was gone. Her car was found abandoned near the federal building. Her apartment had been cleaned out, every piece of documentation missing. The police investigation concluded she'd probably run away to avoid prosecution for corporate espionage. Mrs. Lilly looked directly at the grand jury. But I knew Ruth. My sister didn't run from anything in her life. Someone took her. Someone with enough power to make a person disappear and enough influence to make sure no one looked too hard for answers. The prosecutor introduced Ruth's fail-safe design, the transfer nullification pattern that could have destroyed every authentication system in existence. Expert witnesses explained how sophisticated it was, how it demonstrated Ruth's complete understanding of the mechanism she was trying to expose. This wasn't just documentation, Hayes said, holding up Ruth's final designs. This was a weapon. A way to dismantle the entire network permanently. Did your sister tell you about this? Not directly. I found it in her trunk years after she disappeared. But it makes sense. Ruth didn't want to reform the system. She wanted to destroy it so thoroughly it could never be rebuilt. She wanted to free future generations from hidden manipulation. Corporate analysts testified about 3 major decisions scheduled for early 1993. Decisions worth hundreds of millions of dollars that depended on authentication systems functioning properly. If Ruth had activated her fail-safe, all 3 would have collapsed publicly and catastrophically. And then came the evidence that connected everything to Richard Thornton. An FBI agent named Marcus Williams took the stand with boxes of archived records. Phone logs from Thornton's office in February 1993 showing calls to private security firms known for making problems disappear. Financial records showing payments that didn't match any official corporate expenses. Email correspondence discussing handling the seamstress situation, with language that made the jury visibly uncomfortable. Thornton's lawyers objected repeatedly, but the evidence was too solid. Their client had ordered surveillance on Ruth, had authorized payments to people who specialized in making inconvenient witnesses vanish, had signed off on cleaning out her apartment and destroying her documentation. The courtroom erupted when Williams testified that remains matching Ruth's description had been recovered from a construction site that had been poured in March 1993, a site connected to one of Thornton's shell companies. Mrs. Lilly heard the testimony from her seat in the gallery. Caleb held her hand as she finally learned what had happened to her sister. As 30 years of uncertainty resolved into horrible, concrete truth. Ruth hadn't run away. Ruth hadn't disappeared mysteriously. Ruth had been murdered by people who couldn't afford to let her expose their corruption. And then they buried her, literally and figuratively, covering her body with concrete and her reputation with lies. The defense made their closing arguments, but everyone knew it was over. The jury deliberated for 4 days, careful and thorough, making sure they understood the complexity of what they were deciding. The jury returned with their verdicts: guilty on 7 counts of money fraud. Guilty on charges of secretly working together. Guilty on company rule violations that would completely change how companies operated for generations. And guilty on charges related to Ruth's disappearance, though those came in separate proceedings as the FBI investigation grew beyond the corporate fraud trial to include murder, secretly planning to commit murder, and obstructing justice. Thomas Hale received the lightest sentence among the defendants, 5 years with the chance of being released after 2. The judge acknowledged his cooperation, his true regret, and his efforts to expose the systems he had helped create. Others received decades in prison. Richard Thornton was sentenced to life without parole for his role in Ruth's death. But Mrs. Lilly didn't feel victorious watching the sentences handed down. She felt exhausted, empty, like she had been carrying a very heavy weight for 30 years. And now that it was gone, she wasn't sure how to stand up straight without it. The media wanted interviews after the verdicts came down. Documentary producers wanted her story. Publishing companies offered large sums of money for her memoir. Talk shows wanted her to appear. Universities wanted her to speak at graduations. Everyone wanted a piece of the quiet seamstress who had exposed billion-dollar corruption and helped solve a 30-year-old murder. She turned them all down without hesitation. "I'm not interested in being famous," she told the reporters who camped outside her apartment. "I'm interested in going back to my life." Instead, she returned to her shop. She asked Thomas to remove the security guards he had stationed there. She took down the sign about truth being the only pattern that mattered, the one she had put up in a moment of defiance. She replaced it with the original faded sign that just said, "Carter's Tailoring," in letters that had been painted 40 years ago and never refreshed. Caleb found her there one morning about 2 months after the trial ended, sweeping the floor in the early light before opening for business. The shop smelled like it always had, like fabric and machine oil and fresh steam. Familiar and comforting. "Grandma, you know you don't have to do this anymore," Caleb said. "Thomas set up that fund before he went to prison. You're set for life financially. You could retire, travel anywhere you want, do anything you want." "I'm doing exactly what I want," Mrs. Lilly said simply, continuing to sweep with steady strokes. "I am sewing. This is what I've always wanted to do. But after everything that happened, after all you've accomplished?" "I didn't accomplish anything. Ruth did. I just finally found the courage to finish what she started." Mrs. Lilly set the broom aside and looked at her grandson. "And now it's finished. The systems are exposed. The people responsible are facing consequences. Ruth's name has been cleared. That's what mattered. Not fame, not recognition, justice for my sister. You're just going back to being invisible?" "I was never invisible. People just weren't looking." She smiled softly. "There's power in being underestimated, Caleb. Power in doing small things with great care while everyone else chases importance." Ruth understood that. She built her evidence one garment at a time, one photograph at a time, one note in the margins at a time. Small, careful, invisible work that changed everything. The shop did steady business after that. Some customers came because they recognized Mrs. Lilly from the trial. Most came because they needed hems fixed or buttons replaced or seams repaired. She treated them all the same, with quiet competence and fair prices. Thomas visited once after his sentencing, before he surrendered to begin his prison term. He brought a suit jacket, plain and simple. "I was hoping you'd make something for me," he said. "Not fix it. Make it something I can wear when I get out." Mrs. Lilly examined the fabric he had chosen. Good quality, but not overly fancy. Practical, honest. "What do you want it to say?" she asked. "Nothing. I want it to just be a jacket. No codes, no hidden meanings, just good construction by someone who knows what they're doing." She took his measurements, wrote them in her ledger, and quoted him a fair price. "I can pay more," Thomas offered. "I don't want more. I want exactly what it's worth. Nothing hidden, nothing extra." He nodded, understanding. "When I get out, I'm not going back to the company. I'm not going back to that world at all. I don't know what I'll do. Maybe teach. Maybe just volunteer somewhere, something useful, something honest." "That sounds right," Mrs. Lilly said. When he left, she began working on the jacket. It took her 3 weeks, working evenings after the shop closed. She used every technique Ruth had taught her, every skill she had developed over 50 years, but none of the hidden mechanisms they had been trained to embed. Just beautiful construction, careful stitching, honest work. She included one detail Ruth would have appreciated, a small inner seam, barely visible, with words embroidered in thread that matched the fabric. Made by hands that refused to stay silent. Not for Thomas to see, just for Mrs. Lilly to know it was there. A memorial to her sister, hidden in plain sight, the way Ruth's evidence had been hidden for 30 years until someone finally looked. The trial's aftermath created changes that spread for years. New rules about how companies should be run. Government oversight of special trust funds. Legal ways to prosecute fraud based on secret authentication systems. Dozens of companies changed how they operated. Hundreds of victims received money for what they had lost. An entire system built on secrecy and hidden control mechanisms was slowly taken apart, piece by piece. And Ruth Carter was honored after her death by many organizations. Her patent books were kept by the Library of Congress as proof of company fraud, but also as examples of amazing fabric artistry. Her name appeared in law school textbooks, in courses about how companies are governed, and in training programs for investigating fraud. She became famous for trying to do the right thing, for refusing to stay quiet, for building evidence so thorough it couldn't be ignored, even 30 years after her death. But Mrs. Lilly thought Ruth would have hated the fame. She would have preferred to keep working, keep sewing, keep living a quiet life, making beautiful things. So Mrs. Lilly did it for her. One morning, a young woman came into the shop. She was maybe 20 years old, black, wearing clothes that had clearly been mended many times. She carried a garment bag with careful hands. "I heard you teach sometimes," she said shyly. "I'm trying to learn tailoring. Real tailoring, not just following patterns. I was wondering if you'd consider taking an apprentice." Mrs. Lilly studied her, saw the hope in her eyes, the determination in her posture, the careful way she handled the garment bag like it contained something precious. "What's your name?" Mrs. Lilly asked. "Maya. Maya Phillips." "What do you have there, Maya?" The young woman unzipped the bag and pulled out a jacket she had clearly made herself. The construction was a bit rough, the stitching uneven, but the basic structure showed promise. It showed someone who understood what she was trying to create, even if she didn't yet have the skills to make it perfectly. "I made this for my father's interview," Maya explained. "He got the job, wore it every day for 5 years until he retired. And I kept thinking, I want to make things that matter like that, things people wear to important moments, things that help them feel confident and capable." Mrs. Lilly felt something shift in her chest, a recognition, a connection. "Can you come Tuesday and Thursday evenings?" she asked after regular business hours. "I'll teach you what I know, but I should warn you. Real tailoring takes time, takes patience, takes willingness to do the same thing over and over until you get it right." Maya's face lit up with a smile that reminded Mrs. Lilly so much of Ruth that it hurt a little. "I can do that. I want to do that. Thank you. Thank you so much." After she left, Mrs. Lilly stood alone in her shop, surrounded by the tools of her trade, thinking about Ruth and legacy, and what it meant to pass something on. Ruth had passed her evidence to Mrs. Lilly, had trusted her careful sister to know what to do with it when the time came. Now Mrs. Lilly would pass her skills to Maya, would teach her to create beautiful things with honest construction and careful technique, would show her that there was power in small work done with great attention. The story would continue, not with headlines or trials or famous cases, but with quiet hands making useful things, with skills passed from generation to generation. With the simple dignity of honest work. Mrs. Lilly walked to the window and looked out at her street. The fitness studio was closing. The smoothie place had been replaced by a coffee shop. The neighborhood kept changing around her the way neighborhoods do. But her shop remained small, quiet, unnoticed by most people who walked past. And inside, an old woman taught young hands to sew. Taught them that patience matters more than speed. That quality matters more than quantity. That honest work done carefully and with attention could be its own form of resistance against systems built on deception and hidden control. Ruth would have been proud, not of the trial or the convictions or the headlines, but of this. An apprentice learning to sew, skills preserved, knowledge passed down, a sister finally understanding that the best memorial to someone brave wasn't fame. It was continuing to live with the courage they'd shown. Making small things beautiful, staying visible by doing work that mattered, and never, ever staying silent again. If you discovered a system designed to keep you powerless, would you have the courage to expose it, knowing it might cost you everything?